Lady, written in 1923. And it's called One Perfect Rose. A single flower he sent me since we met, all tenderly his messenger he chose, deep-hearted, pure, with scented dew still wet, one perfect rose. I knew the language of the floweret. My fragile leaves, it said, his heart enclose. Love long has taken for his amulet one perfect rose. Why is it no one ever sent me yet one perfect limousine, do you suppose? Oh no, it's always just my luck to get one perfect rose. It's beautifully kind of set up and then undermined. And the rhyme, rhythm, and the sort of technique is perfect. What else have I got? Oh, let me take you to another of my favourites. These really are quite random. I do apologise. Poems that jump up from an individual experience to something much more universal. When we are writing a poem, very often trying our best to share an experience with those who are going to read it. That's what literature's about, isn't it? To share that experience. One of my favourite truly gloomy poems is Dover Beach. And it was written at a time when, certainly in Matthew Arnold's view, let's get rid of these pingings. In Matthew Arnold's time, this was written in 1851, when he referred to the universal shipwreck of beliefs, there was a great deal of turmoil in the world, and a loss of religious belief. Then the start of a traditional religious belief, and a loss of a great deal of traditional certainties in any case. And this is how he saw it. So he takes his individual experience of standing looking out over the sea at night to talk about this wider malaise. This is Dover Beach by Matthew Arnold. The sea is calm tonight. The tide is full. The moon lies fair upon the straits. On the French coast the light gleams and is gone. The cliffs of England stand glimmering and vast out in the tranquil bay. Come to the window, sweet is the night air. Only from the long line of spray where the sea meets the moon-blanched land, listen, you hear the grating roar of pebbles which the waves draw back and fling at their return up the high strand. Begin and cease, and then again begin, with tremulous cadence slow, and bring the eternal note of sadness in. The sea of faith was once too at the full, and round earth's shore lay like the folds of a bright girdle furled. But now I only hear its melancholy long withdrawing roar, retreating to the breath of the night wind, down the vast edges drear and naked shingles of the world. Ah, love, let us be true to one another, for the world which seems to lie before us like a land of dreams, so various, so beautiful, so new, hath really neither joy, nor love, nor light, nor certitude, nor peace, nor help for pain. And we are here as on a darkling plain, swept with confused alarms of struggle and flight, where ignorant armies clash by night. Wonderful poem of melancholy. I love the sounds there of the night wind down the vast edges drear and naked shingles of the world. It's Wonderful stuff. Evocative poem. Sometimes the themes are more domestic. Here's another poem I've liked for a long time, although it never becomes out of date for me, but I remember certainly it was relevant when I was younger. This is a little poem by Stephen Spender called Rough, and it spoke to me, being a well brought up child. It's called Rough. My parents kept me from children who were rough, who threw words like stones and who wore torn clothes. Their thighs showed through rags. They ran in the street and climbed cliffs and stripped by the country streams. I feared more than tigers, their muscles like iron, their jerking hands and their knees tight on my arms. I feared the salt, coarse pointing of those boys who copied my lisp behind me on the road. They were lithe. They sprang out behind hedges like dogs to bark at my world. They threw mud while I looked the other way, pretending to smile. I longed to forgive them, but they never smiled. It's an interesting poem from the point of view of somebody obviously regarded as advantaged, I think. What else have I got for you? I'd like to read, all right, a poem by George Herbert. When I'm talking about language, one of the things that I do like in the poems that I like, although not all the poems I like have one, is what I look for, and what I look for when I try to write poetry myself really is what I think of as the killer line. You know, that a poem can build up and then a line that just sweeps everything before it. And I can read an example of that. This is George Herbert, a 17th century poet. He was a vicar of a church near Salisbury, I think, Bemerton. And he's often been described as the poet who writes religious poetry that can be, it's very accessible to people who aren't religious. There's a kind of psychological truth in it, particularly about things such as what we would call these days depression, and coming out of depression, like that kind of emotional and spiritual experience. He's very good at that. This is a poem called The Collar, and it's about his struggle, really. He feels that he is living a good life, doing everything right, and getting no reward for it. And he's decided, right, below all this, I'm going to kind of go for it, and forget all this business of restraint and you know, being good and being restrained. So wait for the killer line. But this is The Collar by George Herbert, very conversational poem. I struck the board and cried, no more, I will abroad. What, shall I ever sigh and pine? My lines and life are free, free as the road, loose as the wind, as large as store. Shall I lie still in suit? Have I no harvest but a thorn to let me blood, and not restore what I have lost with cordial fruit? Sure, there was wine before my sighs did dry it. There was corn before my tears did drown it. Is the year only lost to me? Have I no bays to crown it? No flowers, no garlands gay, all blasted, all wasted? Not so, my heart, but there is fruit, and thou hast hands. Recover all thy sigh-blown age on double pleasures. Leave thy cold dispute of what is fit and not. Forget thy cage, thy rope of sands, which petty thoughts have made, and made to thee good cable to enforce and draw and be thy law. while thou didst wink and wouldst not see. Away, take heed, I will abroad. Call in thy death's head there, tie up thy fears. He that forbears to suit and serve his need deserves his load. But as I raved and grew more fierce and wild at every word, methoughts I heard one calling, child, and I replied, my lord. He shivered at the end. That's George Herbert in the corner. We, I've mentioned before, we very often write poetry, I think, in order to communicate our feelings or our thoughts to other people. But we also, perhaps even more so, write it for ourselves. I mean, I've certainly written poems I'd never dream of showing another person, or is very particular to a particular person. And it's interesting to know, why we do that. I've certainly worked as a volunteer in places where there have been some very troubled people, and writing poetry really helps them. I remember talking to somebody who was the writer in residence in a prison, and he said, even these kind of people you might think of as the toughest and hardest of criminals will reach for poetry when their emotion is deep. They had a poetry shelf in the prison library in this case, or they will write poetry when deeply moved. And there's an interesting poem by John Donne, another 17th century poem, writing a long, long time ago, that deals with this, about the way that actually writing poetry, trying to kind of writing something down, putting it into words, finding the best words to say, the most accurate words to express it, can actually help steady that emotion. And this is from a poem called The Triple Fool by John Donne. I am two fools, I know, for loving and for saying so in whining poetry. But where's that wise man that would not be I if she would not deny? Then, as the earth's inward narrow crooked lanes do purge sea water's fretful salt away, I thought if I could draw my pains through rhyme's vexation, I should them allay. Grief brought to numbers cannot be so fierce, for he tames it that fetters it in verse. And it was quite explicit at that time in what was called the metaphysical poetry by John Donne, Herbert, and various other poets, that they wanted to combine feeling and thought. So applying thought to your feelings, expressing it often in a very witty or sort of convoluted way. And this actually, as he said, the vexation of finding those rhymes, of finding the best way of using your thinking mind rather than your feeling mind, actually helped with the, cool that emotion, steady that emotion. So you kind of, you fetter it in verse, and it's things like rhyme and the rhythm that are those fetters, and of course they do give us pleasure when we read it, as well as conveying the emotion and thought to us. How long have I gone on for? Oh, I've gone on about 20 minutes. Friends, those were some random thoughts and some rather randomly chosen poems that I enjoy or have enjoyed. Shall I, Patsy and Stephen, shall I kind of choose who speaks for this bit? If you'd like to wave a hand, I'll call you to unmute and say your bit. Shall I? It's about half.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Should we start with Ray? Ray, can you unmute yourself? I think you can unmute yourself.
Oh, I've always liked, since I was introduced to him by a friend, John Betjeman. Because he can be amusing, sad, has all those emotions. And the one I think I've chosen is, I read it at Christmas as well. It's his one called Christmas. And this is Betjeman being slightly nostalgic about all those times of the past, you know. The bells of waiting Advent ring, the tortoise stove is lit again. The lamp oil lights across the night has caught the streaks of winter rain. In many a stained glass window sheen, from Crimson Lake to Hooker's Green. The holly in the winter hedge, and round the manor house the yew, will soon be stripped to deck the ledge, the altar font, the arch and pew, so that villagers can say, the church looks nice on Christmas Day. The London slopes on Christmas Eve are strewn with silver bells and flowers, as hurried clerks the city leaves to pigeon-hunted classic towers, and marble clouds go scullery by the many-steepled London sky. And girls in slacks remember Dad, and oafish loats remember Mum, and sleepless children in hearts are glad, and Christmas mornings bells say come, to even shining ones who dwell safe in Dorchester Hotel. And is it true? For if it is, no loving finger tying strings around those tinselled fripperies, the sweet and silly Christmas things, bath salts, an inexpensive scent, and hideous ties so kindly meant. No love that in the family dwells, no carolling on frosted air, for all the steeple shaking bells, can this single truth compare, that God was man in Palestine and lives today in bread and wine? I think he goes about it with the gentleness of remembrance as a child, and such things like girls in slacks remember Dad, you know, an oafish lad remember Mum. I just like it because it's remembrance of Christmas time and the, you know, and all these type of things we remember even when we're adults, you know.
Yeah, yeah. What really strikes me about that over again is it's a lovely poem. Is his sort of mixture of registers. There's the line you quote about the oafish lads and things, and yet in some of the language is so beautiful. It's as though he goes from, you know, the ordinary everyday to the absolutely sublime in one poem, doesn't he?
Yeah.
And he's not sneering. I think Betjeman's often like this. He's very, you know, almost Alan Bennettish in some way.
Oh, definitely.
Recognizing our sort of absurdities, but there's something, you know, very kindly about it, I think.
Heather, have you
Yep.
Heather, have you noticed Jules Wood?
Oh, hello, Jules. And actually, I haven't said to Marion either. Oh, it's happy.
Sorry, if I'm not next, then would you like?
No, I couldn't see your face before now. I don't know
sorry. Yes, I haven't been able to have the camera on all the time. Yes. Yeah. Sorry. I just.
Do carry on, Jules. Carry on. Yeah.
Yeah, great, thanks. Yeah, no, it's very interesting to come along. Sorry I was late, but I had a problem with the password. Yeah, I just wondered, I'm trying to kind of incorporate poetry more into my everyday life, and I just wondered if anyone has any ideas on, you know, because poetry can be seen as something that's like only for certain times of the year, or only for like when things are terrible or amazing, and yeah, just and you know, the second kind of thing is I wonder whether poetry has become less everyday or less kind of used in the everyday, you know, in the last 30, 50 years. I don't know. Any thoughts on that, anybody?
I think several of us are keen on reading their chosen bit.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I didn't realise it
right,
was. No, but yeah, I just wanted to kind of throw that in the mix. But yeah, of course.
I think maybe thinking about my grown-up children, probably about your age, Jules, in the 30s and 40s, perhaps go more for music. So sort of, which is another way in which, you know, obviously language comes over to us, and
Yes.
so there's things like that. I don't know. It's hard to judge. It can be a very private thing, I think, poetry.
Right. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Well, yeah. Thanks. No, it's I'm just trying to explore it myself, and you know, it's just
good.
when you have a passion, you want to share it with other people.
Yes. Oh,
I tell you what I think is interesting, and I'll shut up then. We have got an enormous audience today, and I think that in itself speaks to the need and the caring about poetry in our lives. I mean, we've got I'm right, aren't I, Stephen? This is a lot more than usual.
This is the most we've ever had, yes.
Yes. So I think that speaks, don't you think?
Yes, Graham and I used to do well, I think it is still going on. I used to help Graham with a poetry session at Avenue House, and it was very much appreciated. Anyway, let's have another poem. Stephen, did you bring one that you were itching to read?
I am itching to read, but I was surprised that I've got 3 here, but 2 of them are very sentimental. It rather surprised me. But this one is very much opposite to me in my life and a former lover I once had. I actually wrote this out in a book and gave it to her. It's When You Are Old by William Yeats, by Yeats. When you are old and grey and full of sleep and nodding by the fire, take down this book and slowly read and dream of the soft look your eyes had once and of their shadows deep. How many loved your moments of glad grace and loved your beauty with love false or true. But one man loved the pilgrim soul in you and loved the sorrows of your changing face. And bending down beside the glowing bars, murmur a little sadly how love fled and paced upon the mountains overhead and hid his face amid a crowd of stars. Yeah.
That's Yeats. Yeah, is it? It is W.B. Yeats, I think. Yeah. Beautiful.
A bit self-indulgent, but it speaks to me.
Poetry is poetry has. Well, it's not. It's as Jules was saying. I think it's actually necessary, but it can feel self-indulgent. I know, but that's lovely. Anyone else got something they would like to read or to say? Graham, I think you had something. Did you?
Yeah, and also Julia. I've just spotted Julia as well.
Right, Graham first, then we'll go to Julia. Okay, Graham, you're unmuted, I think, now.
I didn't say that I wanted to read a poem. I do, in fact, have one. I think the first poem that I really enjoyed and I could see the value of poetry was The Darkling Thrush by Thomas Hardy. That was many years ago, and looking back on it now, I see that as a rather sentimental poem, and I don't believe that the thrush was actually singing beautifully in the middle of winter anyway, so there's a certain falsehood about it. But poems which I've always valued are the poems of the great poets of the First World War. Perhaps the best known of them is Wilfred Owen. And this is a short poem by Owen, The Parable of the Old Men and the Young, which is not as frequently anthologized as many of his other poems. And it starts with the word so. Now, I'm well aware that language is changing all the time, but one of the most stupid additions to the English language is the fact that if you are asked a question on radio or television, you start your answer with the word so, which is quite meaningless in that context, But here, written over 100 years ago, starting with the word so, does have some significance, because the poem is part of the story of Abraham and Isaac, which of course at that time everybody would have been familiar with. So there was no need for Owen to tell the whole story. And that word so indicates that the poem is just a fragment of the longer story.
Mm.
And he tells how Abraham and Isaac set off. Isaac innocently asks him where the sacrifice is, the creature which is to be sacrificed, not knowing that he is to be the sacrifice. And then at the last minute, when Abraham has been tested to the limit about killing his firstborn son, he sees a ram caught in a thicket, and the angel tells him to sacrifice the lamb instead. And Owen's genius is not simply to refer to the ram, but to call it the ram of pride. And he's suddenly talking about a fundamental cause for the First World War and many other wars that have taken place, personal pride. That phrase reminds me of Tony Blair and George Bush swaggering along it, practicing the Texas walk, and Blair promising that Britain would stand shoulder to shoulder with the United States in whatever adventure it went into in Iraq and later Syria. And then Heather referred to the killer line. Well, the last line of this poem is a killer line. When Benjamin Britten set the poem within his war requiem, that last line is repeated several times to hammer home the disaster which the First World War was. So the poem is called The Parable of the Old Men and the Young. So Abraham rose and clave the wood and went and took the fire with him and a knife. And as they sojourned, both of them together, Isaac the firstborn spake and said, My father, behold the preparations, fire and iron, but where the lamb for this burnt offering? Then Abram bound the youth with belts and straps, and builded parapets and trenches there, and stretched forth the knife to slay his son. When lo, an angel called him out of heaven, saying, Lay not thy hand upon the lad, neither do anything to him. Behold, a ram caught in a thicket by its horns. Offer the ram of pride instead of him. But the old man would not so, but slew his son, and half the steed of Europe, one by one.
Wow. That's great. Thank you very much. That's the killer line. Yeah.
Julia.
Julia, yes, a bit tough to follow, but please do. Yeah.
Well, mine is completely different, I'm glad to say. I'm not very good at reading difficult poetry. For instance, I love the one that Patsy read the other day of Sea Fever, which was, I must go down to the seas again, to the lonely sea in the sky. It just cuts me up. So instead, what I'm going to bring you is something which I think is really joyful, which I think we all need at the moment. And it's by Siegfried Sassoon, who died in, who was born on.
Can you go fairly slowly? You're not all that distinct to me. I don't know whether anybody else is having trouble. Yeah. Yeah.
I wonder if I can turn up a bit.
Perhaps get closer to your machine.
I'll try that. Okay. Is that better now?
It's better, yeah.
Okay. And so the song, the poem is Everybody Sang. Everyone suddenly burst out singing, and I was filled with such delight as prisoned birds must find in freedom, ringing wildly across the white orchards and the dark green fields, on, and out of sight. Everyone's voice was suddenly lifted, and the beauty came like the setting sun. My heart was taken with tears, and horror drifted away. Oh, but everyone was a bird, and the song was wordless. The singing will never be done. And I think that's very joyful.
Yeah.
It's a lovely poem which I found, which is a poem for the day. So every day you find a different poem.
Yeah, thank you so much, Julia. That's yes. How we could spend a whole session on the kind of feelings and images evoked by poems. You know, enormously contrasting and very, very, very powerful, each of them. Has anybody else?
Could I read something?
Yeah, certainly, yes, you go next.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a poem by Mary Oliver. I've really recently come across it. I think she's American. She's a wonderful poet on inner feelings and nature, which I like. I like nature poems. And this is called The Wild Geese. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert, repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees and the mountains of the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese high in the clear blue air are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over announcing your place in the family of things. And I love that line, no matter how lonely you are, you can use your imagination. And in this time when everybody is on their own a lot, I think it's, but I'm beginning to really love her writing. It's very, very deep. Full observations as well of nature.
And that the affirmation as well, I think, is extremely comforting, that sense of belonging, which is the opposite of loneliness.
Yes, yeah, belonging to the family. And this is what, we're doing, and we're lucky to have it. And yeah, that place in the family of things, everything and everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. We have another 10 minutes. So would anybody else like to read something?
You mentioned Dorothy Parker one little bit. She's one of my favorite American writers because she has such an exorbic wit and imagery, which I would happily say to people to read more of her, because I just think she's wonderful.
Are there any more recommendations? If you, if you haven't brought anything along, is there anybody? Actually, Christopher, you had your hand up, didn't you? But
yes, it's not to read anything, but I was thinking about what Jules said about how to make poetry more of your life. And I mean, I've got a friend who from school has loved poetry, and whereas I've usually got a history book on the go, and Ray's usually got some science fiction, my friend reads poetry books, that's what she keeps in her bag. Usually anthologies rather than that, and she likes modern poetry, which I'm one with Heather. I do like it if it rhymes. I find that much easier to cope with. But yeah, I think it's just a case of dipping into things, and yes, and people this morning have given me some ideas of places I might look that I haven't looked at recently. So thank you.
Anne is holding up.
yes, Anne.
Hi. I thought I'd just take a different slant on this, because my introduction to poetry was basically through music. And I was at University of Liverpool in the late 60s, early 70s, which of course, and I met there, well, I was introduced there to the Liverpool poets. And I was just looking up some of the things that they'd written, a very different view of the world. And I also found it interesting, just a different style, sort of like from some of what we've been looking at. I can't find anything by the Liverpool poets at the moment. Books are buried, I guess. So I thought I'd read you Strawberry Fields, which is a poem by John Lennon, which also was something I remember sort of like celebrating at that time. But the thing is, with a lot of those writers, and I find it now, I listen to a lot of kind of popular, what you might call popular music, is that often people are writing and expressing some very interesting and significant things. So as a teenager, I listened to this, but it was only later in life I really sat down and listened to this actually at that time quite disturbed man struggling to express some of the things that he was observing in life. So, and Strawberry Fields is a real place. It was a children's home that John Lennon spent some time in, and it was near where I was living in Liverpool. Let me take you down, because I'm going to Strawberry Fields. Nothing is real and nothing to get hung about. Strawberry Fields forever. Living is easy with eyes closed, misunderstanding all you see. It's getting hard to be someone, but it all works out. It doesn't matter much to me. Let me take you down, because I'm going to Strawberry Fields. Nothing is real and nothing to get hung about. Strawberry Fields forever. No one, I think, is in my tree. I think it must be high or low. That is, you can't, tune in, but it's all right. That is, I think it's not too bad. Let me take you down, because I'm going to Strawberry Fields. Nothing is real and nothing to get hung about. Strawberry Fields forever.
Yeah, thank you very much, Anne. I do rather regret now not including more modern poems. People see things differently throughout the ages, and there are kind of movements and tendencies. It's very interesting. I mentioned to Jules that I thought perhaps a lot of people, perhaps younger people, got their poetry through music. I mentioned that. I remember at a time when I was teaching, this is really some time ago now, about 25 years ago, that we had a look, as the English one, had a look at music, at pop music for poetry, as a way of, I don't know, getting down with the kids, or at least, you know, finding a way in to poetry for people who often thought poetry wasn't for them. The difficulty with many popular songs, it's not that the language is lacking or unpoetic, but it kind of needs the music to make it complete. That's what we found, and we found it quite difficult to find songs that kind of stood on their own, you know, without the music. I mean, perhaps the answer is always to, you know, to include the music. I don't know, but there's no doubt the music does kind of contribute. Otherwise, you just have a poem. But that was the difficulty we found of sort of extracting, you know, the song lyrics. Was that many of them, although very beautiful songs, didn't stand up simply as poems. It's quite interesting, but it's certainly worth looking at. And of course, I mean, I'm thinking of people like Leonard Cohen, who is a poet and a songwriter, and his, I would say that his lyrics certainly stand up alone. But yeah, that's certainly another sort of direction we could take. Marion, what do you think?
I hesitate to read something, but I was recently recommending a poem for somebody who was wanting it. It's kind of one that I heard on Holocaust Memorial Day. It's very well known. It's called Refugee Blues by W.H. Auden, but it is a bit heart-wrenching. So and not a kind of not uplifting. So I was kind of thinking, maybe that's sort of a bit too much for a session like this, but you know, I can locate it and read it if people would be interested.
Hope she does. And while I've
Okay.
Do we have time? Yeah, yes, I think so.
I think what's so powerful about it is it has a refrain that keeps coming back, and that's like another device that poets sometimes use. That you know, you keep repeating a last line, and that kind of reinforces something. And this one does. I mean, probably a lot of people will know it. So if I've got it up on my, if I exit full screen, I can read it straight off.
Yes, do, Marion. Yeah.
Okay. See. Okay, I can't remember what year it is. I think it's in the 30s. So, okay, can people hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Say the city has 10 million souls. Some are living in mansions, some are living in holes. Yet there's no place for us, my dear, yet there's no place for us. Once we had a country and we thought it fair. Look in the atlas and you'll find it there. We cannot go there now, my dear, we cannot go there now. In the village churchyard there grows an old yew. Every spring it blossoms anew. Old passports can't do that, my dear. Old passports can't do that. The consul banged the table and said, if you've got no passport, you're officially dead. But we are still alive, my dear. But we are still alive. Went to a committee. They offered me a chair. Asked me politely to return next year. But where shall we go today, my dear? Where shall we go today? Came to a public meeting, the speaker got up and said, if we let them in, they will steal our daily bread. He was talking of you and me, my dear. He was talking of you and me. Thought I heard the thunder rumbling in the sky. It was Hitler over Europe saying, they must die. We were in his mind, my dear. We were in his mind. Saw a poodle in a jacket fastened with a pin. Saw a door opened and a cat let in. But they weren't German Jews, my dear. But they weren't German Jews. Went down the harbour and stood upon the quay. Saw the fish swimming as if they were free. Only 10 feet away, my dear, only 10 feet away. Walking through a wood, saw the birds in the trees. They had no politicians and sang at their ease. They weren't the human race, my dear, they weren't the human race. Dreamed I saw a building with 1,000 floors, 1,000 windows and 1,000 doors. Not one of them was ours, my dear, not one of them was ours. Stood on a great plain in the falling snow, 10,000 soldiers marching to and fro. Looking for you and me, my dear, looking for you and me. Okay, that's it. I think that's it.
Thank you very much, Marion. Thank you. That was rather in the manner of maybe think of a kind of folk song or a folk.
Yes.
Isn't it? Very, yeah. That's another kind of style of poetry.
Yeah.
Like basic punchy language. Yes. Yes. Really, really very powerful.
Yeah.
It's just about time to finish, but I'm dying to say something. Don't we regard rap as poetry?
Social.
I think we do.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
And there's some very, I mean, I've listened to, oh gosh, Benjamin,
Zephaniah.
Zephaniah. I mean, there's some brilliant stuff coming out in rap, and a very, very interesting sort of clever rhymes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in performance poetry generally.
Yes.
I like the idea and that's quite a kind of, I mean, it shouldn't be, but there's always has been sort of spoken poetry, but that there is a kind of fashion. And I really enjoy performance poetry, and that's different again and needs a kind of different style and approach. Yeah. Had we better wind it up?
Can we just see what David has to say, please?
Yes. Sorry.
But just this has been really inspiring and lovely, and I'm just reminded of some of the roots of poetry in the time when we didn't have writing, you know, and you mentioned accuracy very early on in what you said, and the fact that poetry rhymes and can be remembered, can carry huge bodies of works down because they're remembered by the bard with the whole rhyming structure. And then just two other points. One was that I just had, when Bob Dylan got the Nobel Prize, when I just heard that, I just had a big, huge yes in my heart, you know, as in how, but, you know, it was, gosh, isn't that obvious, you know, and how come nobody ever thought of that before? And isn't that wonderful that the kind of, the great poet of my generation gets recognized as with a Nobel. And then that, not to trivialize it or make it silly, but lots of tiny little bits of doggerel get caught up in poems, right? And I find myself remembering silly little snatches. And when we started, the only thing that would come in my head was Lather As You Go by Ogden Nash, which is, you know, beneath this slab, John Brown is stowed. He watched the ads and not the road. And there's all sorts of lovely children's verse like that just lifts the heart to know the silliness that can be captured in poetry, as well as the depth and the width and the soul.
Yes, indeed. We have skimmed the surface this morning.
Go on, Patsy.
It's wonderful to think of that richness there and free. We can enjoy.
I didn't have to have anything to say, Stephen, except to mention the topic for the next 2 weeks.
Go on.
Okay. Well, thank you very much indeed. I really enjoyed this. Quite different. Next week, Richard Drake is going to be talking about working for change. And Ray, I've got you down. I hope I've got it right. I've got you down for the 29th, is it, of January? You were talking about education and an equal chance for all. I got the right date.
Yep, certainly have.
Okay.
Also, as may I say, it's nice to see David at a hospital now.
Yeah.
We were discussing, Graham, what exactly was the title of your talk? Can you just remind us, please?
It was rather misleading. I called it "Let's Sell All Our Buildings." But I started off by saying I didn't want to sell them all.
Oh, that's nice. That's bad enough.
Made us think, didn't it? That was the important thing.
I find it difficult to let go of the reins, but Patsy's really in charge.
Oh dear, I didn't. Yes, but no one told me. Oh, okay. All right. Well, look, Ray and I are going to be looking after the show as of this week. But I'm hoping that we'll still have inspiration from Stephen from his new home in Wolverhampton. And yeah, we shall miss you, Stephen, but come in long distance or whatever the current phrase is as much as you can. And thank you very much indeed, Heather. I've really so enjoyed this morning. Thank you.
It's been good. Thank you for all your contributions. So it's been fun.
Yes, it was lovely. Thank you.
Okay, so bye everyone. See you next week.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.